Hey there, what's going on, my web development people? My name is Taylor, and this is Coding for Tacos, a channel where I talk about tacos, web development, and freelancing mostly. So if you are into any of those things, stick around. Today's topic is Bootstrap. It's 2020. If you're learning to code or you're brushing up on your front-end development skills, is Bootstrap worth learning? I think it is worth learning, and in this video I'm going to give you 6 reasons why I think you should still learn Bootstrap and why knowing how to use Bootstrap is a valuable skill even today. I don't see a lot of Bootstrap hate out there, but it's natural as someone learning to code, especially with so many new front-end technologies coming out daily. It's natural to ask what to learn, and I think people ask the same question about jQuery, for example. Is it worth my time to learn jQuery? And I thought I should weigh in on this one because I think learning Bootstrap made me really much better at writing CSS in general, and it certainly made me more valuable as a freelancer. I wouldn't be able to do, honestly, a good portion of the work that I do if I wasn't at least familiar with Bootstrap. So that's why I'm making this video, and let's get into it.
It's Taco Tuesday!
A lot of people tell learners not to bother learning Bootstrap for the right reason, I think. And that reason is that they want people to get very good at CSS before moving on to any kind of framework, and they'll be able to pick it up quickly. And to a certain extent, I totally agree, but in my experience, you try to get good at something, but then when you move on to the next step, that will make you better at the previous thing. But what do you need to learn before you learn Bootstrap? I think you should learn floats, learn all the basic stuff, classes, IDs, stuff like that, maybe very basic animations, learn Flexbox as well as you can, and maybe even a little bit of CSS grid. You don't need to be a master at CSS, but if you feel comfortable with Flexbox, and here's the real test. If you can do a PSD to code, then I think you're ready to learn Bootstrap. So if you can take an existing website or a Photoshop file and recreate that design with HTML and CSS, don't bother with JavaScript if you're not there yet, that's fine. But if you can recreate a design with CSS, even only one, I think you're ready to move on and learn Bootstrap. You should learn Bootstrap, but not through tutorials, especially video tutorials. No Udemy courses on Bootstrap. You can take 1 hour of a Bootstrap video course, and then you need to learn from the docs and from Google. Learn by building. Otherwise, go back and get better at CSS first. And here's why. Here is why I think you should still learn Bootstrap. Number 1, for its grid system and its media queries. I know that's kind of two things, but let me break it down. Bootstrap uses a grid system, actually based on Flexbox, which is why I think Flexbox is so important, one of the reasons. And in Bootstrap, the full width of the screen is 12 columns. It's based on a 12-column system, and the reason I think this is important is because every other CSS framework I've ever used is the same. They also work on a 12-column system, and so I think that's very important. And now for the media queries, Bootstrap has some standard media queries, meaning that when you're on a different screen, the CSS will be different, or could be different if there's a media query, based on the size of that screen. And the sizes are extra large, large, medium, small, and extra small, I believe. And the reason this is so great or good for someone learning to code is because you get a feel for when you should be adding media queries. You get an idea for when you should be changing the screen to look better for tablets and phones, or the opposite direction if you're doing mobile first. But these days, responsive design is so important, and Bootstrap has a system for making websites look good on any screen size, any kind of device. And so really, I think you can learn a lot about responsive design just from Bootstrap and from its standard classes. Reason number 2 to learn Bootstrap is the naming conventions. As you're learning to code, you will learn that it's actually very important and it can make a big difference how you decide to name things. We're talking about CSS, so what do I mean by this? Well, let's say that you have a class for a button, and on every website, really all or almost all of the buttons should have kind of universal styles. Maybe some are different colors, but there should be they should be uniform. There should be some kind of standard, right? They should be the same size at least. They should have the same font. So you want to make a button class. Well, in Bootstrap, the default button class is BTN. And then after that, you can add, I believe, like BTN dark. You know what? Let's take a look at the Bootstrap website and I'll just show you. Don't worry, this will be super quick. I Googled Bootstrap examples, and on the Bootstrap website, there are some great examples. I'm going to look at this one. And here we have a button up here, the sign up button. So I'll inspect that. And you can see it actually. It has a class of BTN and then a class of BTN outline primary. And that is this kind of button. You can see that all the buttons have kind of similar styles, like the border radius and the padding. They look kind of similar, right? Well, this second class, BTN outline primary, dictates this one. Let's check out this contact us button. Aha, here we have a BTN class and then BTN large, BTN block, and BTN primary. So you can see that there are some standard classes that can be used. And this is important because as you're writing CSS, whether it be Bootstrap or something else, you want to give classes names that make sense. So even outside of Bootstrap websites, you're going to see the BTN class used all the time. It's kind of universal for button. The same thing with container. A lot of people make a container class to define the width of their website, the maximum width that it can be. And so there are all kinds of classes like that, and Bootstrap really helped me to learn how I should be thinking about the way that I name my CSS classes. And that leads me perfectly into number 3, which is it teaches you about reusable classes. It makes you think about reusable classes. And what do I mean by that? Well, like the button example, if you have a lot of different buttons on your website, maybe some are different sizes, maybe a few are different colors, but you can start with that base BTN, right? And that will define the global styles for all buttons, and then if you want to modify the color or the size, then you can make another class to add on top of that. But that way, if you need to change the buttons, all you have to do is change the one BTN class and all the others will follow. And so Bootstrap, at least for me, it taught me to think about writing classes that I could reuse over and over again. And in the end, I think that saves quite a few lines of CSS. I briefly touched on number 4 already, but number 4 is the fact that Bootstrap knowledge is easily transferable to any other CSS framework. All the CSS frameworks I've worked with have a grid system. Another example is that I was just using Bulma, the CSS framework, the other day, and they have their own button class. It's button the element with a class of button, and that's the standard class, and it works just like Bootstrap's BTN. And so I really don't think you're wasting your time at all, even if for some odd reason you didn't use Bootstrap much in the future. Your knowledge will be very transferable to Material, to Bulma, I think to any CSS framework. They're all kind of similar, they work very similarly, and so it's really worth your time even just for that. The 5th reason to learn Bootstrap is because it really does allow for fast development. If you're comfortable with Bootstrap, I don't care who you are, I think it's going to be faster to use Bootstrap than to write pure CSS, and there are just a lot of times where the project calls for that, and because time is money, it really makes sense to use a framework like Bootstrap. And not only that, but Bootstrap also gives you a system. So when you're long gone and the project is handed off to some other poor soul, they won't be scratching their head going, wow, this is a strange system. But they'll look at it, they'll recognize that it's Bootstrap, and they'll feel right at home. They'll feel comfortable, hopefully. People like to say that using Bootstrap adds a lot of bulk to your project, but I really don't think so. It's true that it adds some weight to your website, but I think the value that you get from using it far outweighs any kind of bulk that it would add. In fact, I just checked, and if you're only using the minified CSS file for Bootstrap, that's less than 150 kilobytes. That's less, I mean, a lot of people have pictures that are heavier than that. I mean, one picture on their website. And so, sure, it does add to the bulk of your website. I won't deny that, but I really think that the value far outweighs the bulk that it would add to your website, in most cases. Finally, to the sixth and final reason, maybe the most important reason that you should learn Bootstrap, especially if you aspire to be a web developer, and that is the fact that Bootstrap is everywhere. I checked, actually, and Bootstrap is used on almost exactly 20% of all websites. All websites! That's a lot. So if you're a web developer, I just have a hard time imagining that you would be able to avoid working with Bootstrap. I have a great Chrome extension called Wappalizer. I think that's how you say it. And I'm going to show that to you right now because I think it's super cool. And as soon as I started using it, I was convinced that I needed to learn Bootstrap because I saw just how many websites use it. So I'll leave a link in the comments, but this is the Wappalizer website where you can add the Chrome extension. And it's super cool, I think, because you really get a feel for the tech that people are using. And it's actually just right up here, Wappalizer, and you can see, as much as the extension can tell, what technologies that different websites are using. Let me show you another very famous website, GitHub. I'm sure you've heard of it if you're interested in programming at all. And you can see that they use Ruby on the back end, and look, Bootstrap, there it is, Bootstrap. And so as you're browsing the web, if you have this extension, you'll notice this a lot, that Bootstrap is used everywhere. Like I said, 20% of all websites. That's huge. After all this, you might think that I am the biggest Bootstrap fan and I use it for every project. And I would be fine with that. But for things like my portfolio site, generally I would rather write my own CSS. But there are so many good reasons to learn Bootstrap, and I really think that all web developers should at least be familiar with it. If you're very good at CSS, it won't take you long at all to learn and get familiar with, and you're going to see it all the time. Other CSS frameworks are becoming really popular. You'll hear a lot about Tailwind, you'll hear a lot about Bulma, new CSS frameworks are coming out and they're awesome. I like them too. But Bootstrap is here to stay. Bootstrap 5 supposedly won't use jQuery for the JavaScript portion at all, so I imagine it will be more lightweight. But it's all over. You're going to see it whether you want to or not, so you might as well get familiar with it. And I really think there's a lot of value to learning. I'm a freelance web developer. A freelance WordPress developer is probably more accurate. But honestly, I think at least 40% of all the projects I've ever worked on as a freelance developer used Bootstrap, and that's a lot. And so for me, having been familiar with Bootstrap was super valuable, and I still think you should learn it even now in 2020, even though it might not be the most popular, exciting new technology. I really think that if you're learning to code and you master the fundamentals of CSS and Flexbox, I really think that adding Bootstrap to your toolkit will really make you a more valuable developer. That's all I've got to say on the subject. This video was way longer than I expected, but I hope you got some useful information from it. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought. If you have questions, you can ask me there, and I will definitely respond. Thank you so much. I'm Taylor. This was Coding for Tacos, and I hope to see you again soon.